Hello, good morning, and welcome to Newsfile. Trust you are having a fantastic Saturday morning. Now, if you are like me, I will be by now in bed, my television on, and watching Samson and his guests from the comfort of my bed. Now, unfortunately today, I don't have that comfort because Samson is away. He is back next Saturday though, so I get to reclaim my comfort. So if you are watching us from the comfort of your bed or in your car as you drive or however you get to enjoy this program, welcome. So the finance minister was in Parliament on Thursday with the mid-year budget review. As they say, he swerved everybody when he declared that he will not ask for more money and that he will spend within his means. And that, as he says, he will not also introduce no taxes. That, I must say, was not expected. Many expected that he would ask for more money. The minority had already poured cold water on it, claiming he will spend more money by the time the year ends. The finance minister, in this mid-year budget review, also declared the 1 million jobs agenda for the youth and also delivered a special message from the president to the youth in which the president said, in essence, that I hear your pain and I'll fix it. So did the mid-year budget review meet your expectation? My guest will have a go. Then, of course, the most trending issue this week, the anti-gay bill that is set to go before Parliament next week. It is dividing opinions, but is Ghana risking the wrath of the West in taking on this matter? Should we care that there may be sanctions? A fascinating conversation is about to ensue. So stay with me. My name is Evans Mensah, and I will be right back with my guests. And thank you very much for staying with me on Newsfile. Again, welcome. Remember that Newsfile is brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and as close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Also brought to you by Robert & Sons. Seeing is definitely believing. Way Lead, home is where one starts from. Star Assurance, your solid partner. Duraplast, where Duraplast goes, water flows. DBS Industries. SEMA, helping people, businesses to succeed. My guests are joining me now, and we'll start with that very controversial matter of the LGBTQ plus bill, which is set to go to Parliament. We'll get some details about that very shortly. And that is why we are joined in the studio by, I should call him the lead sponsor of the bill, Sam George, Sam Oneti George, is MP for Ningo Pram constituency. And he is in the studio with me. Sam, thank you very much once again.
It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning to you and our viewers.
Also joining me is Robert Amoafo, who is a former country director, Amnesty International, and he joins us via Zoom. We're also joined today by Dr. Charles Rekubrobe. He's a chief policy analyst of the Ghana Institute for Policy Options, and he will join us very, very shortly. I remember that you can join us on our many social media platforms, indeed, as we have this conversation. So before we get into the specifics of where we are with that particular bill, I want you to listen to how this has played out this week. We'll hear from the Speaker of Parliament, and we'll also hear from Amnesty International. Watch.
All those threatening the members of Parliament who are leading this bill, please be warned.
Thank you.
We cannot be threatened in our homes. This must be stated loud and clear to those who have come to do business in Ghana, those who represent their countries and think that they are right. We also represent our country. And they can never dictate to us as to how to live or not to live in this world. And I'm very clear in my mind that this House, the Parliament of Ghana, will pass this bill as soon as possible. I have gone through it, and I'm sure, and I will confirm what Honorable Sam George has said, that this bill will be a reference point for many, many countries. It's very detailed, very comprehensive, and really a bill that you can refer to as justice. It's gone in accordance with all the provisions of our Constitution, our laws, and our international obligations. It is a law that even those who are against it will find it difficult not to accept it. And I want to assure all of you that we'll create room this week for the bill to be presented to Parliament officially. Wow. We'll refer it to the appropriate committee, and it will go through the process. We invite anybody who has anything to add to or take away to appear before the committee. The committee will present the report. We'll take it through all the stages of processing the bill, and inshallah, it will be passed this year. I know God will see us through. Amen. Those who are thinking otherwise, please be advised. Some members of Parliament who may not have the heart to go with us, don't worry. We know about doubting Thomases. Tomorrow you will see the light.
Strong words there from the Speaker of Parliament. And I have with me Sam George. So you were at this event?
Yes.
Well, what event was this?
This was when we officially presented the draft bill to Mr. Speaker to commence and kickstart the entire process of the legislation. Okay,
so when he started by talking about threats against MPs and et cetera, and warns the people to be warned, etc., to back off, what was the context? Who was he referring to? Has there been threats?
Well, we have seen some very interesting actions. I mean, on Easter Monday, the Australian High Commissioner, for example, was in my constituency. Went to my constituency, met with people under the guise of a cycling tour, but met with people and ran around the place, and then posted on his official Twitter and Facebook page, including the Australian High Commission, calling me out for not doing my job in terms of sanitation and road construction, and rather focusing on legislation. And so I responded to him on his official handle and said to him that if he was well educated, he would know that the role of an MP is not fixing the road. That's the role of central government, the Minister for Roads. The role of sanitation is the duty of the Assembly, the DCE, not the MP. But the role of the MP is legislation, and I'm doing my legislation. Then subsequent to that, we met at the Hearts Kotoko game. And there he came and accosted me and threatened me that I would never get a visa to any European country. And I said to him that he has not heard of Inzulezu. And in the middle of all of those that confrontation.
He said that to you, that you're not get a visa?
Yeah, he said to me.
Any European country?
Yes, and that if
not only to Australia, but
no, and he mentioned the United States and all, and said that if I ever stepped in Europe, I'll be arrested. And I said to him, well, he's in Ghana, and I will not be threatened. And that if he did not take care, I would make sure that the laws dealt with him, because he had breached several laws in Ghana. And in the middle of all of that, there were a number of the Heart fans who saw the back and forth, and some of them wanted to shake him up a bit, and so he ran to the military. The next day, he writes to the speaker that I had assaulted him and caused a mob to attack him, you know, and all of that. And that's what the speaker said clearly to him. We will not be threatened, we will not be intimidated in our country. You know, if we really wanted to call a spade, that gentleman would have been expelled from our country, because he's broken several laws. His first interview that he had in this country was with Bolare, in which he broke the Children's Act of Ghana, because he went out there and announced that his 14-year-old son he had come to Ghana with was gay. I mean, that's against the Child's Act of Ghana. You don't put out such information about a minor in public. I mean, several infractions of the law by this High Commissioner, who needs to be reined in one way or the other.
Are you intimidated? Because when he says you're not going to get a visa, you'll be arrested, and you are a member of parliament, so you will travel for official business. That is a likely possibility.
Do I look like I'm intimidated? Do you think that any... Look, the laws of the land are not the whims and caprices of a renegade High Commissioner. Not at all. Okay? On what basis am I going to be arrested? By who? In which jurisdiction? For what reasons? You get it? I mean, the law is clear. I mean, you cannot just...
let me guess, for violating or threatening to violate the rights of other human beings.
There's no law like that. There's no law like that anywhere in the world. There is no law like that anywhere in the world. And so I'm the least perturbed about any of those things.
So you also travel?
I definitely will, and I certainly will. When the need arises, I will. And nobody has any rights to curtail those. You must have basis in law. You know, rights are not absolute, but they can be curtailed. But there must be a fundamental basis in law for the curtailment of those rights. I have breached no such law. There are persons who preach hate. There are persons who preach all kinds of extreme measures. Action or blacklisting can be taken against such persons. I challenge anyone to show any evidence of such actions on my part. I've been very minded in what I'm doing. And when I act as a legislator from Ghana, the oath I swore on the 7th of January 2021, when I was being sworn into office for my second term, was to defend the 1992 Constitution of the Republic of Ghana.
Not the European Constitution.
Not the European Constitution, not the American Constitution. The 1992 Constitution. My fidelity is to this Constitution. And this Constitution in Article 39 is clear on what the role of our culture. In fact, I can read for the purposes of our listeners and our viewers, because everything in this bill is from this Constitution. Article 39, which is in Chapter 6, under the Directive Principles of State Policy, it says, subject to Clause 2 of this article, the state shall take steps to encourage the integration of, and here, listen, appropriate customary values into the fabric of national life through formal and informal education and the conscious introduction of cultural dimensions to relevant aspects of national planning. And in 2, it says, that's 39.2, the state shall ensure that appropriate customary and cultural values are adapted and developed as an integral part of the growing needs of the society as a whole. And in particular, that traditional practices which are injurious to the health and well-being of the person are abolished. I'm based and grounded in law and pushing this legislation. So, except any other jurisdiction is going to say that I should, and again, I would always side with the Constitution of the 1992 Constitution of Ghana over the Constitution of any other country.
Sam, stay with me. On this preliminary comment, let me just take a quick input from my other guests who are joining me virtually. Let me bring in Robert. Robert, I mean, former country director, Amnesty International. You just had there some George disclose, and the speaker, he said the speaker was speaking about the threats on those who are sponsoring the bill, including a threat, Sam George says, by the Australian High Commissioner to Ghana, who says he will not get a visa, and if he travels, he'll be arrested, and the ensuing conversation at the game. What's your reaction to that? I mean, in the midst of this is a legislation that is being pushed to the Parliament to consider. Sam George says based on the Constitution. Where do you stand on that issue of foreign intervention in the process of sending a bill, legitimately so, through Parliament in a sovereign country?
Thank you very much, and good morning to you and your viewers. And good morning to Honorable
A very good morning to you, Robert.
Yes, I think that first of all, I do not side with the ambassador if that has been his action, to in any way or any form threaten a state legislator in the manner in which Honorable Sam George has described. I mean, if that is what happened, I do not subscribe in any way or form. I think that we should show some sort of respect and also support in the manner of ensuring that people are not threatened by what they believe in. I think that he should be able to travel and do his work and learn and also be part of the society as a whole. What I do not agree with is his opinion of the law in the said Article 39. And then also, I do not agree entirely with the bill. I think it is unnecessary and it's unfounded in any form. I think it is marred by myths and misconceptions about sexuality, where none of the people proposing or people pushing the law understand the issues that they are legislating. And looking at the bill, I have read it so many times, and we are currently writing a paper in my university on how this thing is based on myths and misconceptions that need to be clarified, or else it would have some dire effects.
I'm going to come to the specifics shortly of the arguments for and against, as we've heard, and where we are with the bill soon. So we'll get to the details. But let me bring in Dr. Charles Akrubebe on that point quickly. Dr. Akrubebe, thank you for your time again. Thank you for making time this Saturday morning to join us on Newsfile. I want your quick preliminary comments on the disclosures Sam George had made about the Australian ambassador and this whole, this whole push and perception of a foreign intervention in a sovereign country's push towards passing a bill on this matter. What do you have to say about what you've just heard? Hello, Dr. Charles Akrubebe. Okay, let's we'll fix that and come back to Dr. Akrubebe on that all-important subject, because that's has been a major part of this conversation about the threats of foreign sanctions. I will reserve a bit of time to look at that, briefly, broadly, and the fears that this might have consequences for the economy going forward, in addition to the individuals who may be involved. Let's go to some of the specifics now. So, Sam George, the debate has been going on for a while. Before we get to the specifics of the central arguments, where are we now in terms of the bill actually coming to the floor? Do we have Dr. Akrubebe now? Dr. Akrubebe, do I have you? Hello, Doc.
It's gone again. Hello.
Okay, we have a terrible connection to him. Sam, so give me where I will lay out the roadmap towards pass it for me. As we speak today, where's the bill?
The bill has come to Parliament. We'll have the first reading, but the whole process is such that we presented the bill to the Speaker. Mm-hmm. The Speaker referred it to his legal department for advice to see if it complied with the constitutional requirements for a private member's bill. When that was determined, the Speaker signed a warrant of gazette. We took it to the government printing house, Assembly Press. It was there for 14 days. It matured and came back with a certificate of gazette. Mm-hmm. Once that was done, we then forwarded it to the Business Committee of the House last week, or just this week that has ended. And yesterday, when the business statement for next week, which is actually, as it stands, the last week of Parliament sitting for this meeting, it's been programmed to be for first reading. So now where we are is that it's been advertised in the business statement for next week. So on Monday, it's supposed to be one of 5 private members' bills that are supposed to go through the first reading. After the first reading is done of the bill, it will be referred by the Speaker to the appropriate committee. That committee would accept public memoranda from the public. The memoranda will come in, the committee will sit on it, debate on it, look at the value of the memoranda that have come in and possible amendments that would arise out of this memoranda, and then on the basis of that, we'll take it through a winnowing process to fine-tune what amendments are. And then we come back to the floor for the second reading with a report of the committee. The second reading of the bill is where the debate really happens. So that's where we're going to go by what we call the clause-by-clause consideration. So there are 25 clauses in our bill. When we pick clause 1, if there are 10 amendments to it, we will take each amendment one by one and debate it. Those of us who are the sponsors of the bill and the many other members of parliament who support the bill will debate with whoever is sponsoring an amendment the value of that amendment. If the amendment is one that is in line with the object of the bill and seeks to strengthen the bill and make it a better bill, I'm sure there's going to be very little objection to it. We're going to just look at the value of it and accept it, and then that amendment will be incorporated into the bill. As and when there is a disagreement on an amendment, that is where the debates will happen. Detailed debates will happen, and the speaker would eventually put it to a vote, a voice vote, and the yeas will carry it or the nays will. If someone is unhappy with that, the person can then call for a vote by head count. And so basically we'll do that for each amendment, for each clause, till we run through the 25. We're minded that there could be an attempt to abuse the system, to just delay the process by filing so many amendments that are needless. But that's why the winnowing committee would work to winnow it down to substantive amendments so that there's no filibustering.
Did you say you anticipate that there might be frustration?
Well, that's a possibility.
Okay.
That's a possibility. So, but I mean, Parliament in our standing orders has taken care of that. I mean, so that people don't abuse the filibustering process. So we have a winnowing process that exists that helps to reduce the timelines for some of these amendments. And then we'll take it through. But my appeal to you, your media house, will be like I've made on several other platforms, and they've all agreed to, is that the second consideration stage of the bill, which is where the debates will happen, we'll be grateful if your media house will carry it live, because the people's representatives are going to be debating and stating their positions on aspects of the bill. It will be important that the people who have sent us there know the positions that their representatives are taking on these issues. If there's the need for a vote, people must see how people are voting, and then we'll be in a better place for us to make value judgments. Because I keep saying that pushing this bill, yes, personally, I hold a similar position, but the urge to lead this has been driven by the outcome of town hall meetings I held in my constituency, 18 of them.
And all
18, not in one of those meetings did anybody rise up and say to me, step back from this. Everybody said, go ahead. My two traditional councils that I represent, the Ningo Traditional Council and Pram Pram Traditional Council, are fully in support of this. I represent the people of Ningo and Pram Pram. So once they have spoken, I must do their bidding. So I would expect every MP to
let me ask you, the minister, the Speaker of Parliament says he expects that the bill will be passed by the end of the year. Are you that optimistic?
Yes. The second consideration stage will most likely happen when Parliament reconvenes in October. Between when we reconvene and when the budget will be read sometime in November, it gives us about 3 to 4 weeks. I think that's enough time for us to go through the winnowing process and the second consideration stage. And if that is done, the third stage is just a mere formality. So I am confident that before we rise in December, we should pass this bill.
Let's go to the specifics of where we are now with the bill and the arguments for it. But let me kick you off with a question. Since this became public, as in we saw the bill for the first time, there have been a lot of arguments. You've debated people on Twitter, you debated people on radio and television. Has any of the arguments softened your position on the matter?
Well, I in all honesty, I've spoken with the drafting office. I think there are two issues that I think I would even sponsor an amendment on. Two issues that have to do with definition. Because if you look at our bill, in section 2 of the bill, that's the interpretation section, and we've defined almost everything in there. I think that two of the issues that kind of leave some confusion and ambiguity in people's minds. Even though originally I don't see it, but after listening to counter positions, I believe that there are two of the definitions that we need to tighten up, and so we will work on that.
Which are these? I'm curious.
When we get in there.
No,
don't worry.
Because
it's you see, like I said, there are two amendments that I think I'm willing to sponsor an amendment to tighten. No, we are going to go into
that. So we can all illuminate this
Don't worry,
conversation.
you see the amendments when we get there.
Okay.
Hopefully,
Hopefully, Robert Amoafo will touch on some of those, and maybe you can tell me.
Sure.
I mean, but you definitely don't want to put this out now.
No, not now.
I'm wondering why.
Not now.
Because the debate has already started.
Well,
so right now, opinion before it goes to Parliament.
It is with the greatest of respect to your production team and the fact that your viewers, this is a big platform, that I chose to do this, because I'd actually declined to do any further media engagement, because right now we're moving on to into the stage where it's parliamentary work. Okay, the details of the sweetness of the pudding is in his eating. We're getting into the parliamentary business of scrutiny and working on the bill, and so most of this commentary right now is really neither here nor there. But like I said, I believe that the 2 amendments to definitions that I think I want to look at again.
So what's your central argument? Why is this important? I mean, we've lived with our friends LGBTQ plus people for years. They've not hurt anybody. They lived in a society. Everybody growing up knew somebody who had the tendency or was showing. I lived in Adabraka, and I must disclose, I had, right opposite my house, there was a gay pub. I mean, I come home at 11 from work, and I see people standing by the roadside doing stuff. Men to men, boys to boys, girls to girls. I mean, so why do we need another law?
Well, that's a fundamental question most people have asked. And I say to them that Section 104, this is not a new law. This is not introducing a new legislation into our legislative framework. This is actually expanding on existing legislation. So when I get calls from international media houses and even local media houses who say you're seeking to criminalize homosexuality, I say to them, no, I'm seeking to expand legislation, existing legislation on homosexuality. Section 104 of Act 29, which is the Criminal Offences Act, is clear on unnatural carnal knowledge. And you read the law, the letter of the law tells you what it is. The spirit of the law makes you realize that in 1960, the intent of that legislation was to criminalize homosexuality. Gayism was the main thing at the time. And so you see that the wording of it is actually focused on gayism, the gayism aspect of homosexuality. But 61 years on, there have been new variations. So basically, this bill is to tighten and strengthen the legal framework. We've seen the police arrest persons accused of or alleged to have been involved in this, but they are unable on the basis of Section 104 to carry out proper prosecution of the acts, because Section 104 is no longer, in quote, fit for purpose, given the scope. Like I keep saying, in 1960 was basically gayism. In 2021, you have almost a half of the alphabet gone in this LGBTQIAAAPP plus phenomenon. Now, again, you also have our cultural values that need to be protected. I've read Article 39 of the Constitution to you. And most importantly, is the growing boldness of advocacy for something that's illegal. And I've seen a video making the rounds on social media I agree very well with. I have my kid. It's my kid. I train my kid. I take care of my kid. You have no right whatsoever to come and indoctrinate my kid in a way and manner that I am not comfortable with. You're seeing the advocacy of LGBTQ+ in our secondary schools. They're setting up recruitment drives in our secondary schools. They have pimps in the secondary schools who they pay money to.
You know this how?
Well, we've done a lot of research, and recently the headmistress of Ola Girls came out to complain.
True.
Giving credence to the fact that we're making, the point that we're making. And it's not just in Ola Girls, it's widespread. There are several community-based organizations.
We've always had SUPI in our schools.
No, you see, but you've never had people actively recruiting and being paid to be recruiters. That's what's going on now. That's the boldness that has come into this category of perversion, for want of a better phrase, where now people are being paid to go out and recruit young girls into SUPI, to go out and recruit boys to get into active homosexuality. Now it's becoming a commercial enterprise. There is money being thrown at it. That is becoming a threat to our cultural and national fiber. Look, some community-based organizations that work with some government institutions that are supposed to offer some sexual support by way of maybe provision of condoms and lubricants and stuff, have gone beyond that and are actually now pushing the agenda of homosexuality. And we have evidence of this. You understand me? So you have, and to top it all up, you saw the opening of an advocacy office that had members of the diplomatic corps show up at such function. Now, the members of the diplomatic corps showing up at such function is an affront to Article 41 of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. And I'll just read that for you. Article 41 of the Vienna Convention is pretty clear. It's pretty clear what it is that you must do when you're in a country. Because and that for me was a wake-up call. When I saw diplomats show up at this function, Article 41 says, of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, it says, without prejudice to their privileges and immunities, and that's diplomats, it is the duty of all persons enjoying such privileges and immunities to respect the laws and regulations of the receiving state, in this case Ghana. They also have a duty not to interfere in the internal affairs of that state. So if you have Section 104 of the Criminal Offences Act criminalizing homosexuality, any diplomat who goes to a function that seeks to sponsor or advocate or support this illegality is breaching Article 41 of the Vienna Convention. And the effrontery with which they did it, the ease with which they did it, and the apparent lack of response from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs prompted a response from Parliament. There was an outrage in this country at the opening of that office. We are the people's representatives. And so I went ahead and made a statement in March on the floor of the House and said the government must immediately step up and shut down that office, which we must give credits to government. That was done with expedition. But then we didn't see the sanctions that we expected to see follow those who ought to have known better and who went out to support it. But then this bill is in direct response to the growing trend of advocacy. And that's why when you read the bill, the most punitive measures are actually for advocacy and not even the act itself. You get it? There's been a lot of spin that, oh, if you're caught in the act, you go to jail for up to 10 years. That's not true. That's not true. Okay?
But the bill proposes penalty, including jail terms.
Absolutely.
Yes. But you say it's not 10 years.
No. It's a maximum of 5 years.
For the most serious crime under the proposal.
For any, if you read Section 6, and Section 6 of the bill is where we have stated out what the offenses are in this bill. And look, I'll just read what Section 6.2, which imposes the penalty. It says, a person who commits an offense under paragraph A, B, C, D, E, F, or G of subsection 1 commits a second-degree felony and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of not less than 750 penalty units and not more than 5,000 penalty units, or to a prison term, to a term of imprisonment of not less than 3 years and not more than 5 years, or both. So maximum jail time for any of the offenses which are the acts of homosexuality are maximum of 5 years. And look, we looked at international best practice and looked at our own jurisdiction. If you read from the BBC, 25th of July 2015, 2 Canadian religious leaders whose religious beliefs allow them to engage in polygamy, Mr. Winston Blackmore and his former brother-in-law, James Ola, were jailed each for 5 years on account of polygamy. So even in Canada, people who practice polygamy are being jailed for 5 years. So if it is...
Is that where you borrowed the time?
No, we actually looked at our Criminal Offences Act and looked at the punishment for second-degree felonies. You see, in the bill, we have second-degree felonies and misdemeanors. So the actions that are second-degree felonies, we looked at the commensurate jail sentencing or the sentencing regime in our current legislation for second-degree felonies. And most times it's between 3 to 5 years. And we stayed within that. We didn't extend it. There were people who appeared before us as we worked on this bill who said we should make it 10 years. But we said, look, for us, the main thrust of this bill is actually not punishment. It's actually reformation. And so even when you have been found guilty and sentenced, there's the opportunity for you to recant and go through a reformative process and be taking out, the law says that if a person recants during prosecution or even after sentencing, that person must be allowed to go through a reformative process as determined by the court Upon successful completion of the reformative process, you're free to go home.
Stay with me, Sam. Let me bring in Robert. Robert, so if as Sam has cited the example from Canada, was it?
Yeah, Canada.
If the Canadians criminalize polygamy, which of course isn't the case in Ghana, why shouldn't Ghana, based on our cultural values, also take a similar stance on a subject that there is almost unanimity on among Ghanaians in terms of the overwhelming majority of people who, do not support homosexuality, to also criminalize homosexuals? They can jail somebody for up to 5 years for polygamy. Why can't we do same for homosexuals, which indeed our cultural values frown on?
Thank you very much. And first of all, to say that we are not here to learn from other people's things that they are doing, and if we do not agree with them. Of course, if in Ghana we still have people doing polygamy. We have certain cultures that go ahead and still have issues of polygamy going on. So that is not the basis of discussion. I think that the idea is that if another country has that, there are people there who could fight against it if they also don't believe in it. And there are people who I'm sure would be speaking against it now over there. And so we are, in our context, we accept polygamy. It goes on. We have instances where there are child marriages and all of that in our country, and it's still going on. And so I think that when we are talking about the issue of homosexuality or sexual orientation of LGBTI plus people, let's not bring in other things that do not bear any merit on the issue that we are discussing. I think that pinning this on cultural values and popularity is
Robert, just a quick one on the first point you made. I mean, doesn't that argument about what Western countries doing in their country, doesn't that become relevant when we have Western countries tell us that what we are attempting to do is fundamentally against human rights and that we should not do so? And there have been threats of sanctions that we've heard from some quarters. And yet they criminalize polygamy, which is reverse, we accept locally. Isn't that why that is relevant? That example is relevant?
No, and because one, we have this perception that like I mentioned before, there are some myths, and these myths are, one of them is what we are discussing here. The underlying discussion is somebody being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender is not a Western thing. It's not something that is coming from West. No country called UK or US or Canada packed homosexuality and came to pour it on Ghanaians and said some Ghanaians will be gay. And so let's not have this discussion around the idea that homosexuality is a Western import. It is not. We have, like you mentioned before, we have had homosexuals in Ghana, even in Africa, since the beginning of the world and wherever it may be. And all the things that many people mention, even the underpinning discussion by some of the proponents of this bill, clearly shows that homosexuality is not something that started by the West or brought in by the West. So that myth must be cleared, that, like you also mentioned, there are gays in Ghana, they've existed, they've been amongst the people for so long, they have not shown any distraction to anybody, they have not done anything that destroys our economy or destroys and people violate human rights or violate a person or cause violence against anybody. There are people who exist every day, they go to work, they are human beings like any other person, and we haven't recorded any research that has shown that a gay person has caused somebody to die or somebody to have some bad effects because they had sex. Two consenting adults went into their privacy and had sex and came out and continued their life. So I think that myth around the idea that the West is bringing in something is false. It is only the idea that we should understand that even in the West, if you look at the US state and case, 50 years ago, this discussion was being had as we are having now. There was a member of parliament, just like we have Honorable Sam George sitting in your studios, also doing the same thing as is happening now. So it is not too foreign even to them that they have had this discussion before. And so it is important that we bring all into this discussion and to perspective that it is not a foreign thing, it is a human thing. Sexuality is not a foreign thing, it is a spectrum, and we are all on a sexuality spectrum. And so if somebody is found on a spectrum of having being gay, the person is not wrong, the person is a human being and must be respected and given all the human rights and protection as expected.
Okay, Robert, let's go to the fundamental legal document which guides us all, our Constitution. And the proponents and sponsors of this bill have been at pains, and some judge have referred to that on the show, reading from the constitutional provision that says that subject, of course, that of this article, I'm talking about the directive principle of state policy, the state shall take steps to encourage the integration of appropriate customary values into the fabric of national life through formal and informal education and the conscious introduction of cultural dimensions to relevant aspects of national planning, and that the state shall ensure that appropriate customary and cultural values are adapted and developed as an integral part of the growing needs of society as a whole, and in particular, the traditional practices which are injurious to the health and well-being of the person are abolished. So it is under this that we've seen the campaign to abolish something like female genital mutilation. But under this too, we've seen this campaign, this push to pass a law that explicitly forbids something that many believe, as the Constitution says, it is not appropriate customary and cultural values, which the Constitution says we should ensure that doesn't happen. So how do you respond to that? Because this is anchored on a constitutional provision.
So it's important to also bring into perspective what appropriate cultural and values are, what appropriateness means. As you would see, as you read, as one of the articles say, harmful and something that is not, something that is harmful and injurious and to people. I shudder to ask and also to find out how two consenting adults going into their privacy, having sex, is injurious to anybody at all. And people mentioning the idea that it is not our culture. What sexuality is a culture? I mean, it's only in this bill that I'm seeing that there's an attempt to define appropriate, you know, and therefore, which means that this is an opportunity for us to all discuss broadly, not just for the sexuality that we're talking about, but broadly, what is appropriate cultural and practices of Africa, of Ghanaians, is women in the North who were not allowed to be part of masculine or male discussions, who are now able to sit in parliament because we have learned from other places that women can participate. Is it appropriate cultural practice? You know, is it injurious to us? Is it harmful to us? You know, those are the questions that come to my mind, and I hope that we'll be able to answer those questions. I think it's important that we understand that if you're talking about something that is appropriate and you're talking about something that is injurious, they are two different things, or something that does not harm anybody in any way. It is not a matter of popularity. If it was a matter of popularity and everybody agreeing to it, many of the decisions taken in Parliament would not have been taken. And we have seen a lot of backlash on certain decisions generally in public about some of the things that are happening, because popularity is not the thing. It's a matter of understanding that how does a person having sex in their privacy have any effect on any individual as two consenting adults who do not harm anybody by their existence.
Sam George?
You see, I'm just going to pick up a few issues he's raised. First and foremost, I'm glad you pointed out to him the inconsistency in the position by the proponents of this LGBTQ thing. First and foremost, when you talk about polygamy, they say it's a Western thing. Let the West deal with their issues. If there are people there who are not comfortable with it, let them speak. You accept that if a section of society is not comfortable with a certain position, they can speak about it. So why do you have a problem with a large majority, an overwhelming majority of Ghanaians speaking out against the perversion of LGBTQ and saying that we don't have a right to speak our voice. That's the intolerance of the proponents of LGBTQ that we must point out first and foremost. And it shows you the inconsistency. When it suits them, they say, do it this way. When they keep shifting the goalpost. Secondly, he asked the question, what does two consenting adults having sex, what harm does it do? Well, you are very uninformed on what homosexuality is about. Homosexuality is not just about sex. And go and check all the jurisdictions where homosexuality have started. It's not just about consensual sex between two adults. It moves to the redefinition of what marriage is. It moves to what the curriculum of school kids becomes in accepting this perversion.
As in the comprehensive sexuality.
Absolutely. It then moves from there to even affecting the livelihoods of sportsmen. The Tokyo Olympic Games. Female American sports athletes or female American athletes have been kicked off their slots by transgender men. That affects the economics of an individual. Now go to the United States, go to the European capitals where homosexuality has been made legal, and see how much of taxpayers' money, public money, is used to have healthcare facilities simply catering for the problems of the homosexual community. Because the health conditions of homosexuals is completely different from what we're talking about. The anal tears and the anal warts and all the kinds of medical complications they have. In this country, today, the Ghana AIDS Commission gets support in the region of almost, 200 million? Ghana cedis or $200 million from foreign donors, and a large chunk of that is going to curb the menace of HIV/AIDS. The section of our society that is pushing the prevalence of AIDS in Ghana is men having sex with men, homosexuals. So taxpayers' money or monies that could have been channeled to finding beds for our wives to give birth is being used to take care of buying antiretroviral drugs for people who are increasing the prevalence of HIV/AIDS because they're having homosexual sex. And you're asking me, what is the effect on the public? That's the effect on the public I'm showing to you. Look, this is not a morality bill. Heterosexuals do not go around saying that, and there are heterosexuals who have kinky sex and all kinds of things in their bedroom. They don't come around and legislate or advocate that we should accept their way of heterosexual sex. They keep it in the confines of their bedroom, and people respect their privacy. But when you want to take out what is supposed to be your private, intimate moment and determine that that must become our way of life, and determine that our kids must be taught that, and determine that there must be pressure on an already stretched healthcare facility in this country, we will not sit down quietly and watch it. And the argument that homosexuality has been with us from time immemorial.
But that's true, hasn't it?
I keep asking a question. Show me one traditional council that has accepted homosexuality as a part of us. From time immemorial, individuals who show those tendencies have been seen as pariahs. Our tradition and customs have not associated with them. And someone sent me a fantastic text message. Armed robbery was not an import from the West. So why have we not said that because it didn't come from the West, let's allow it and let's accept it? It was not an import from the West. We have it here, but we have laws that fight against it. So whether it is an import from the West or not is neither here nor there. That's a very moot point. The point is that society accepts it. Is it comfortable for us? Yes, he said 50 years ago, 60 years ago in the United States. In fact, it was in 1952 that homosexuality was moved out from being a medical condition. Until 1952, it was a medical condition in the United States. Until 30 years ago, the WHO, the World Health Organization, viewed homosexuality as a medical condition, a mental health condition. It saw it as schizophrenia and pedophilia and necrophilia. In 1952,
science has evolved.
Well,
that has changed.
That's not true.
Why are we not moving with that time?
Hold it. That is the myth and misconception the LGBTQ community pushes out.
But science has changed.
It's not true. In 1952, the decision by the United States government to move homosexuality away from being treated like the way schizophrenia and Alzheimer's disease and necrophilia and pedophilia were treated and bestiality was a political decision. It was not a decision based on votes of scientists. It was not based on any scientific finding. It was a vote of politicians who had been lobbied by the LGBTQ lobby. The same thing happened with the World Health Organization. No science backs the move. In fact, the biggest investigative work into the human genome is the Human Genome Project. Okay, that's the biggest development. And the LGBT community have sponsored over 20 researchers into the human genome system. And they have not been able to identify a homosexual gene. We've been able to identify genes that make people obese, genes that make people angry. We are able to trace and sequence all of these genes and identify what will make somebody a sanguine and choleric. All of these minute details, even making you prone to cancer and specific kinds of cancer, have been traced to a gene. All of these detailed studies have not been able to identify a homosexual gene. So when they tell you that it's a science, I dare and challenge them to show you the science. One science journal. Again, another myth and misconception. Let me give you one last. Yeah. Another myth and misconception they give you is that the whole world is doing this. That's not true. Europe has about 50 countries. In Europe, only 18 countries have made homosexuality legal. Only 18 in Europe. There are 195 countries in the world. Only 30 have made homosexuality legal. So they should not put out that misconception that the whole world is moving and Ghana is staying back. Ghana is standing with the majority of the world. 165 countries still see this as a perversion, and our law will be tightened and strengthened to ensure that we safeguard our culture, our tradition, and ensure that this perversion remains in the confines of those who want to practice it and will not become the norm for our society.
Robert?
Yes, thank you very much. And it's rather interesting that a politician will be calling a researcher into sexual orientation, gender identity expert as ignorant. It's rather sad that he's showing a lot of ignorance in, like I mentioned before, sexuality and gender identity issues. Like I mentioned before, you do not throw about words like he did, like LG, and they are bringing LGBT and currently I'm writing a paper that shows clearly, like, politicians like this always pin sexuality and these laws around the sexual activity of a sexual activity. Let me be very specific. Sexual activity of gay men. In the string of sexual minorities, as we call it, there are a number of them, and as you have listed in your law, you can see. So this idea of pushing this negative thought of anal tear and all of that is wrong. Now let me clarify this idea you mentioned and wrongfully misinforming us about the HIV issue in Ghana. I think it's important to understand that HIV amongst key populations, as we call them, which include men who have sex with men, and remember, this is not gay men alone, with men who have sex with men. It is heterosexual men are included in men who have sex with men. HIV prevalence amongst key populations is high because of things like this. And if you read the research properly, you see that criminalization of men who have sex with men is a key thing that continues to push people into hiding, and therefore does not allow them to come out for sexual and sexual and HIV services, because they are afraid they go to the hospital, they'll be reported, they will be arrested, and all of that because they did, as you have mentioned, Honorable, that they have had their privacy and something has happened to them and they are going for services. Like a heterosexual will have sex with a man will have sex with a woman and catch a disease or something. Just the same thing, they cannot go for services because of such a law that we are trying to push now. And also the issue of the prevalence. Do you know that the prevalence amongst heterosexual people is higher than that within the key populations? Because key populations numbers are calculated by the number of people that are found within a particular study. So it is not this idea of pushing it is high. Yes, it's high amongst because of laws like this that is being made. So if this law is being passed and is going to push more people into hiding, is not going to help them attain and get HIV services, as heterosexuals who have a higher prevalence could have the service, then it is a sense of discrimination, as already we can talk about. Now you talk about this idea of World Health Organization and the US. It's wrong. You are misinforming us. The idea is that the World Health Organization has removed this thing from the idea of this being a mental illness from its system long time ago. So then why would you come and mention US? We're not talking about US. You accept medication from the World Health Organization. World Health Organization is saying that let's do vaccination. We are doing. Let's do whatever it is we are following. The World Health Organization is saying that criminalizing somebody for having private sexual activity and somebody identifying. So you also, let me quickly, a lot of things you mentioned that brings up these myths that you have. The idea that when you criminalize sexual activity and the law doesn't criminalize, it criminalizes a person. That is why I say that sexuality is not an act. It is an individual. If you say that they've not found any homosexual gene, where is the heterosexual gene that they have found? You know, where in the research have we found that there's a specific gene that says A is heterosexual and B is not? The reason why we cannot find a homosexual gene is because there's nothing like that. And therefore, sexuality is an individual who is born with a particular sexuality and they live as a human being. They have their sex in their private, as you've mentioned. They do not, nobody, I think it is wrong also that you create this impression that some people are standing out there and promoting and recruiting, and you mention all these words. That is also a wrong assertion. The point is that LGBT organizations are created because of things like this, like we are doing now. There are a lot of LGBT people, and like I said, there's research that I can show you, who are facing violence and human rights abuse because of the existence of the Section 104.
But Robert, on that point, there is also specific evidence. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the Ola girl's headmistress, who said, held the PTA and told the parents that it's come to their attention, the school is alarmed, that there's active recruitment of their girls by LGBTQ activists who are trying to recruit these girls to join them. That's a different conversation, which is what has alarmed a lot of people.
Yes, so that is why I say that then there's a law already that exists. Those are children, as you have mentioned, and no adult is expected to engage in any sexual activity with a child. Whatever sexual activity it is, heterosexual, homosexual, our law clearly criminalizes that. So why don't we just use that law against that? If people are recruiting, what are they recruiting for? If they are telling the children something that that it is wrong, that you think that they shouldn't hear, like any other thing that we say children shouldn't hear, we should stop them from doing that by ensuring that we implement the existing law. Why do we have to create another law that would seek to criminalize an individual for just being who they are, for going to work every morning and being a human being? And the only part of their life that anybody or a parliamentarian will be interested in is the sex that they are having. And therefore want to criminalize them for having sex and pushing this agenda of people recruiting, which is false.
But when you say false, when you say false, I mean, I just mentioned a particular example.
That is why I'm saying that if that is the case, and which I hope that I will also find out if it is, that there are laws that seeks to criminalize anybody who does a thing like that. Those are children. And there's a Children's Act that specifically criminalizes that. I mean,
Robert, do you agree that laws reflect a people's aspiration, their beliefs, and their culture?
LGBT people are people who live in Ghana. So they should also be heard.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I get the point, but I'm just asking a simple question. I mean, regardless of LGBTQ or whatever issue, on the principle, do you agree that laws reflect the general aspirations of a people?
Yes, I agree that's...
So there's a Pew Research, and Pew is globally renowned research institute, renowned for they did research in 2015, and I'm told there's a recent one that surveyed homosexual beliefs and acceptance in countries. They asked the question, should society accept homosexuality? Should society accept homosexuality? In Ghana, they found 96% of those they surveyed said Ghanaian society should not accept homosexuality. Now, if you believe that laws reflect the people's aspiration, you have 96% of Ghanaians saying we should not accept it. Why don't we pass a law that reflects this aspiration?
Because passing a law to reflect this aspiration infringes on the existence of people who cause no harm. Where is this understanding of society coming from to agree to say that we should not accept such people? It is coming from an understanding of lack of education and lack of awareness about this community because it's a minority group of people. And those minority group of people obviously will not be heard. Out of the 100, there was a number that was 4. And therefore, they are also part of the people. One, if you hear this conversation, like I said before, there are things that Parliament said. Recently, we are going to buy cars, some V8s and things. How many Ghanaians agree that we should go and buy cars for MPs? There are things that have been said in Parliament that their laws are going to be passed. How many people agree that Parliament is living up to its expectation, or a particular thing is being done, but it still goes ahead and is done? So we should not base this on popularism and popularity. It is supposed to be based on, listen, you say that you do not accept the sexual orientation of another person. Does it affect you as an individual, specifically, violently in any way?
Okay.
Does it affect you every morning when you wake up and you're going to work? Is there a homosexual who is stopping you from going to work? Or has homosexuality stopped us from having our prices of fuel rising? Those proponents of this law should show that homosexuality, or the fact that somebody is having sex in their bedroom, is affecting the way that people would eat food or drink, or the effect. The Honorable mentioned about the issue of money being spent on HIV and sexual MSMs. The most important thing you should understand is that, unfortunately, because of this popularity thing that you just mentioned and the minorityness of LGBT people, governments like Ghana do not support or do not have any funding to support these people. And therefore, it's important that you understand that if people are suffering from violence, people are suffering from the fact that because they are a minority, people push them up and abuse them. And so there is the need for them to be supported. Why do you think that it's not good that we give money to ensure that people are protected, their human rights are protected? Like I mentioned, there is research that shows violence against the community. There's research that shows that families are rejecting. Last week I was on an interview with some MPs who clearly said, one of the MPs, and I hope that you can get the video, and said, I'll shoot my son if he comes to me and says that he's gay. Imagine the number of young people going through such a thing in their homes.
Robert, stay with me. Stay with me. I want to bring in Dr. Charles Okubobe, who's now joining us on the telephone line. Hopefully, we can have a good connection to him. Doc, where do you stand on this debate?
I'm neither for banning nor for legalizing. That's where I stand.
Why are you attempting to be neutral on this very important matter?
I'm not neutral. I'm not neutral at all. But my position is that people are there's not a monolith of culture. Certainly not in this country. There's so many ethnic groups that we haven't arrived at any cultural position. Neither is there a monopoly of religion in the country. We are not an Islamic republic. We are not and even Islamic republics, you have Shias and you have others who don't even accept Ahmadiyas. So there's a very difficult thing about when we talk about cultural values and all of that, and a lot of this is coming from an imposition of a particular religion in a society that says we are a secular society with freedom of religion. It's not a question of I'm neutral. And we should be very, very careful about this issue of majority and minorities. Because if we go down that route, we'll almost be justifying why, let's say, there's racial discrimination in some northern countries. Because clearly there the white man is more than the black. And so we shouldn't really push this majority question. A tyranny of the majority should never be a yardstick. The protection of minorities is very, very important. So I think we should carry out this conversation. And if I may take on my colleague engineer, but my nephew, honorable, we engineers, we have certainty about solutions. But this kind of thing we are talking about, I don't think we should be having certainties based on our so-called moral perspective and our religious preference. What is morality in Ghana? I don't know that there is a particular morality that defines us as a people. We have different religions, we have different ethnic groups, we have different, many things, which also tend to affect what becomes our morality depending on where we are coming from. So I think we should be very careful on this almost certain position of what is right and what is wrong. My view is tolerance. You know, I'm almost 70 years old. I grew up in Kumasi, where the society of the early 1960s were tolerant of Kojo BCS. Through to the 80s and 90s in Ghana, where the most popular night spots were night spots where there were open gays mixing with open heterosexuals, and everybody tolerated each other. To the time that I did Ghana 50, where again there was a great tolerance of different types of people in the society. So I'm always for tolerance. I'm very much against intolerance.
I mean, should I say that if you are for tolerance, then you are opposed to the bill? Is that be a fair way to put it?
Look, I wouldn't even talk about opposed to or for the bill. I mean, I respect the right of people who hold certain very strong views to try to push a certain narrative. Personally, I didn't like, and I don't like the way the Australian person threatened the Honourable. Neither do I like the way in which the Speaker of Parliament, which is supposed to be a neutral, in my view, to ensure that different discourse and different perspectives, have decided that he will become the champion of a particular bill. I'm not too clear about that. I'm sorry about the Australian trying to threaten the Honourable about why he shouldn't push what he's pushing. But again, you see, the irony is that both of them are right. The Honourable, is right to defend stuff in his country according to his constitution. And the diplomat is also right in terms of they can refuse you entry into their country, never mind who you are. Even the president, when he has to travel, let's say, to the UK on an invitation of the British government, still needs a visa to travel there. So it's unfortunate that there was this altercation. But as far as the bill is concerned, I mean, when it is actually launched into Parliament, then we will know what it looks like, and we will be able to look at it in the context of our Constitution. I mean, what Honourable may determine as being within the Constitution may not be my perspective of what is in the Constitution. I mean, I hold to the view, for example, that you cannot implement this bill in terms of enforcement and the justice system without you having to call on the Consolidated Fund of Ghana in terms of the police and judges. And if you look at Article 108(2), that immediately, in my view, disqualifies that bill, because that bill must emanate from the executive. So those issues will come up when the bills are laid and proper challenges are put down. But my position is I'm neither for banning nor am I for legalizing.
Okay, Sam?
Yeah, to my senior and my uncle, Charles Rekubo Tazan, one thing that I know is that engineers are never ambivalent. Engineers take a definite position on issues, yes. And so he seems to be ambivalent on this. But let's be clear as well.
Ambivalent. All I'm saying is that engineers, there's only one solution.
Absolutely, Uncle. But as an engineer, you know that there is no solution that's 100%. But you look at the highest level of efficiency. What seems to give you the best probability in your test becomes your model as standard. And that's what I'm saying, that when you look at a Ghanaian society and you model the Ghanaian society, what gives you a certain basis as a standard, if you're going to use the engineering principles, will be the view of the majority. And that cannot be termed to be the tyranny of the majority.
Look, I wouldn't go with this view of the majority, because otherwise we'll be purging minorities all over the place because we say that they are not the majority of our population. I think it's a very dangerous threat to go on this majority argument. We use it for choosing governments. Hold on. In a liberal democracy, it tends to be one of the ways we choose governments. We can also use proportional representation, etc. But in terms of tolerating, I mean, I heard you talk about medical conditions. There are many medical conditions and deformities by this kind of reasoning, we'll be putting people away to death and ostracizing them and purging them, which really is not the way we want to go.
Uncle, can you give me one example? One example of a medical condition that one of the medical conditions you're referring to? If you can just give me one. That by which reason, if we apply this, we'll put people to jail?
I wouldn't give you one because you
can none.
Search it for yourself.
Because there is none, Uncle. But anyway.
No, sorry. I'll give you one. And I've said it before and people have gotten upset about it. If you are an albino in Eastern and Southern Africa, you almost certainly be run out of town and killed for ritualism. Do you know that?
Sure. Well, and that's why.
Now, so we wouldn't do that here.
Why? Because the majority of us agree.
No,
the majority of us agree that should not happen.
We don't do that here. We tolerate albinoism. We live with them. Whereas it is a medical condition as defined by you people.
Okay.
It's a medical condition.
Doc, stay with me. Let me get some to wrap up on the point. But the fundamental point is, how do you do this, but also ensure that protection for the minority group?
Minorities have their rights.
I mean, Doc, give me a second. Just hold on for me. Give me a quick second. Okay. Let me hear from...
minorities would always have their rights protected, okay? And take, for example, when you take this bill, this bill protects the rights. You see, and that's why I say let's draw the distinction. Rights are not absolute, first and foremost. And rights are spelled out in this 1992 Constitution. In this Constitution, homosexuality or sexual preference is not a right. Sexual preference is not a right, as guaranteed by the 1992 Constitution. Now, rights, as they emanate from the Constitution, can even be curtailed on the basis of three pillars: public health, public morality, public safety. It's on the basis of those rights we are curtailing the rights of people's religious expressions by saying that they are extreme and they are fundamentalist, and on the basis of that, we call them terrorists. Yet we curtail it on the basis of public safety and public morality. It's the same way. Majority, using the albino example, majority of people in Eastern Africa deem it right to go after that people with those conditions. That is how come it's become acceptable there. Majority of people in Ghana are tolerant of that medical condition and see it as a medical condition, and know that there is the majority of us have taken a position that we are tolerant of it. If majority of us have taken a position that we are not tolerant of a certain sexual preference and perversion, we have the same rights to take that position. Now, you see, Robert makes a point about the WHO and vaccines that we take and medicines that we take. Yes, even the COVID vaccines. When the WHO says a vaccine is well and right for us to use, we don't use it immediately in Ghana. We subject it to the FDA. The WHO's acceptance of a vaccine is based on science. Science. And even when they base it on science, we subject it to our own scientific test here with the FDA. That is why it is only AstraZeneca and Sputnik that have been passed. We hear currently the Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer is also undergoing, and the Pfizer one, I think Moderna, are undergoing. So it means we also do a local check of the science. Show me the science behind homosexuality. One, he admits that there is no homosexual gene. Good. And so there is no science to back this argument that they make, that it's a biological thing. That's how they are made up. If you yourself admit that there is no biological evidence to it. Again, he talks about violence against LGBTQ people. Look, I'm going to read you an article from the 14th of June, 2021, on The Guardian, the UK The Guardian. 2021 on pace to be the deadliest yet for trans and gender non-conforming Americans. As of 14th of June, 2021, 21 Americans, transgender, and gender non-conforming persons had been killed. Show me one in Ghana that has been killed. So when you talk about tolerance, and you talk about violence, and you talk about the attacks on these persons, show me one person who has been killed in Ghana on the basis of their gender non-conformity. 21, as of June 14th this year, had been killed in the United States. When you talk about human rights, we should not take a lecture from countries like the United States. The United States withdrew from the United Nations Human Rights Commission, simply because we wanted to have an investigation into the human rights track record of the US government. Ghana has solid human rights records that we will protect. Now, you see, this final thing, this whole thing about show me what it is that is bad about two consenting adults, don't reduce it to that argument. That argument is moot. I've established here that your consenting adults having sex goes beyond just what they do in their rooms. And what we are speaking against is the advocacy. And who told you that that is natural? Have you looked at that? You say you are a researcher into sexual anatomy and all of that. Look at the human anatomy. The anus is, and forgive me, this is morning TV. The anus is not designed to be penetrated. And that is why when the anus is repeatedly penetrated, you have a medical disorder. So it is unnatural. It is not the natural way of things.
But we do oral sex. That's also unnatural. I mean, and the argument is that if you pass this, it's and by extension also criminalizing. Again,
that's incorrect. When you read section 6.3, which is where they make conclusion. It says, for the purposes of this section, sexual intercourse occurs, and sexual intercourse is in parentheses, occurs where a person penetrates the anus or mouth of another person with the penis of that person or other contraptions. Now, this says it's in reference for the purposes of this subsection.
This is the bill. That's what you're proposing.
Yes. It says for this section. Now, which section is it? Section 6. Now, the only place in this whole bill that sexual intercourse is used, for which it has been defined, is in section 6.1a. And it says, a person commits an offense if the person engages in a sexual intercourse between or among persons of the same sex.
So you're saying that
if your wife is the one giving you a head, or you are the one giving her head, you are of the same sex. Fine. Okay. Absolutely.
Okay. Let's wrap up here. Let me take a quick final thoughts from you, Robert, and then I'll come to Dr. Charles Rube, and then we'll, of course, take a quick break. Robert?
It's sad to hear an MP saying that we have to wait to see killing before we do something about a minority group of people. It's sad.
I have not said that anywhere.
And it's worrying that when somebody tells you that people are facing violence, your answer will be that let's see people die and killed before we do something about it.
But Robert, to be fair to him,
so cheap.
He just mentioned a factual example in the US and says, show me evidence here that you've had a similar measure of violence against homosexuals. That's simply what he said. I mean, you're reading too much into that.
No, that is why I'm saying that if you're saying I should show you an example of a death situation in Ghana, then that is why I'm also saying that if he likes, I'll be happy to take his contact and give him all the research and the data that we have. But apart from that, if there is violence against LGBT people, I think that when we hear that some people are facing violence, we should be more empathetic towards it. And rather, unfortunately, our bill also criminalizes anybody who is empathic towards LGBT people. I think that it's also important in my concluding statement to say that reducing sexuality to anal sex is wrong. I've said it before, that sexuality is not about anal sex. There's sexuality between two females that is different. Sexuality is on a spectrum. Let's not limit it to anal sex and put our argument on it. It's also wrong to always compare. I've heard Honorable making several times statements of terrorism and comparing it to this situation. And I'm saying again, LGBT people are human beings They don't need to show any gene, like how heterosexual doesn't need to show a gene that they are heterosexual. That is why I'm saying that there's no need for us to discuss about genes, because sexuality is not about genes. We are born as human beings and we are born with our sexuality, and there's no gene of showing anything. It's important that we continue to talk about human rights, as he's also trying to do, that we talk about protecting people and protecting their rights as enshrined. Article 21, this bill criminalizes a lot of things, and it also takes away Article 21 rights of a lot of people in Ghana, not just LGBT people, but a lot of people. And I think that's important that we look at this carefully in the process of going through this.
I mean, Dr. Chakra will be very quick concluding thoughts on this.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to get involved in the discussion of what is right and what is wrong. All I'll say is that since my fellow engineer has been so emphatic on what are rights, my view is that even Section 104 could be unconstitutional according to our Constitution. 104 is from about 1960, our Constitution is 92. I think when this bill becomes formalized, i.e. when it gets its first reading, I suspect there will be many challenges to it at the Supreme Court, where our Constitution gives the judges the right to decide what is consistent with and what is not consistent with our Constitution. That is going to come. So I really want to get into a layman's opinionated discussion as to what is right and what is wrong.
Dr. Charles Ugrobe, thank you. Sam, thank you also on this.
I'll get 20 seconds.
No, I mean, I give you the last. This is the last round of comments.
I was just going to assure him that the human rights of LGBTQ persons, human rights for free trial, is enshrined in Section 22 or Clause 22 of the bill.
Free trial.
It says, yes, where it actually criminalizes extrajudicial treatment of persons with homosexuality.
In the bill.
And anybody who assaults, verbally harasses, or physically assaults a person on the basis of their LGBTQ affiliation can go to jail for up to 3 years. They're not talking about that.
Please also give me a quick one to address that one as well. Then why do we need this law to criminalize people, as you have done in Section 2 of the law? Then why do you criminalize people for holding up themselves as gay, lesbian, bisexual?
Question. I'm grateful for all your thoughts on this, Sam, Robert, and Dr. Charles Ugrobe. When we return from this quick break, so the finance minister was in Parliament on Thursday with the media budget review. As many said, he almost, indeed actually swerved the expectation that he was going to ask for more money. And some have been suggested there was going to be additional taxes. He came in and was emphatic, I don't want more money. I'm not going to tax you more. I simply came to update you. That, I must say, was not expected. The minority had already poured cold water on it, claiming, well, listen, I just give you to the end of the year. We can bet he will be spending far more than he actually has to spend in the year's period. We'll put that to the test when we return. Remember the big deal also in the media budget review, the 1 million jobs agenda that he announced, the creation of a youth bank. And the president came with a special message to the youth. And he said, in essence, that I hear your pain and I will fix it. So did the media budget review statement that the finance minister read on Thursday, did it meet your expectation? We're going to reshuffle the park a bit as far as the panelists are concerned when we return, and then we'll deal with these, as something says, vexed matters. Stay with us.
Repeat, I'm not here today to ask for more money. I have not come.
And thank you very much for staying with us. You are live on Newsfile. It's on Joy 99.7 FM. It's also on the Joy News channel. It is across our social media platforms. It's on Joy 99.7 on Facebook. It's on the Joy News page on Facebook. It's on Twitter. It's on YouTube. You cannot have an excuse why you miss it. Just go on your phone and go onto Facebook, and you can find us streaming live there. And so thank you for staying with us. Remember, the to hit us up. Our hashtag is there, Newsfile. I am at Nwete. Find us. Let's have a conversation. I'm going to be reading a few of your messages. Remember that the Newsfile is brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group, as close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons, seeing is believing. We lead. Home is where one starts from. Star Assurance, your solid partner. Duraplast, where Duraplast goes, water flows. DBS Industries. SEMA, helping people and businesses to succeed. A few of your messages I want to share with you on the first topic, which I can see a lot of you are excited about. And so let me get into a few of your comments on it. Kufiamwa says LGBTQI+, a case of it's bound to happen versus it will not happen under my watch. That's a question mark he puts there. A case of it's bound to happen versus it will not happen under my watch. Wendy Shea's bedroom commando in the background. Now this economy is so heated for me that I can't even go on heat, he says. This discussion is about the future of our children, not the adult. David in Legon says, we have reduced the LGBTQI discussion to only gays and lesbians. However, there is more to that. And it's and there are a few more questions that expand on this that Nana Sewa also raises. Because he asked the question, did he, and this is a reference to some George, just limit the definition of illegal intercourse to man-on-man, oral and anal sex? I'm curious about what they feel about woman-on-woman, man-on-man and sex, woman-on-man strap-on sex, woman-on-woman strap-on sex, man-on-man hand jobs, man-on-woman hand stimulation. The list is endless. There is a lot of double standards in the bill. And I think that's one of the areas that we need to get some clarity on from the advocates of this bill. So that's heteros are not criminalized for having orgies or for swinging, although these sexual practices are frowned on culturally. Even polygamous couples will not tolerate group sex. So there's a whole lot of very interesting positions on this matter that still needs to be examined. There's even a poem that I have received from some of you on this very important conversation, and it's from at Dan Dreams. It says, every society has its culture. Yes, some cultures need to go through changes, but culture differs from country to country. Homosexuality is not African. Hashtag Newsfile. This one from at TM Kobina. Hey, Charlie, Sam George is so intelligent. In fact, the person on the show, the people on the show can't match up with him. That's his thoughts on the matter. And then let me take a very final one on the from Akin Jide. He says, Dr. Rakubebe has said everything everyone hasn't said on this issue. We are treading a dangerous line towards tyranny of the majority. Thank you for those views of yours. I'm grateful. Keep them coming. I'll read more very shortly. I want to change course a bit because I want to go to bread and butter. Bread and butter being the economy, the budget. The finance minister was in the House Parliament, that is 2 days ago on Thursday, and he presented a mid-year budget review. As I've said already, he did something that many people didn't expect. Somebody said, within the context of COVID and the economy struggling and attempting to recover, you definitely needed more money to stimulate the economy. And so we were expecting that he was going to go there and ask for more money, but he didn't. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And can he really stay within what he'd already asked for in the 2021 budget? Was he being populist? We'll discuss that. And to do that, joining me right now is Dr. John Kuma. He's a Deputy Minister for Finance, MP for Jusu. I believe he's joining us on Zoom. Dr. Priscilla Chumesi Bafo is a Senior Lecturer at the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana. Professor Godfrey Bokwing is a Professor of Finance and Economist at the University of Ghana too. Dr. Theo Champon, economist and political risk analyst, also joining us via Zoom. A lot of profs and doctors and economists and etc. joining us. But I want to keep it simple. This is about Banku and Kinky. No more, no less. Let's have that conversation. Prof. Bob, when you are with me in the studio, let me start with that basic position of the finance minister going, because traditionally we become accustomed to our finance ministers go and use the media budget review to go and say, I need more money, right? And then first he goes there and says, listen, I don't want more money. I don't need more taxes. I'm just coming to update you, and I'm going to tell you that I'm going to stay within my 2021 budget that I came for. Did that surprise you, first of all?
Well, I wasn't surprised.
You weren't?
Yes, we had said before that we needed to be moderate. Once you have a clear understanding of the economy, the challenges we are going through, and given the negative comments about our debt buildup and the fact that our domestic revenue envelope has not responded the way we expected to all the tax measures from the policy perspective, from the administrative perspective, government itself found itself in a certain moral constraint angle from asking for more money to spend, which probably would increase our debt stock and all of that. So the fact that government is unable to generate a lot more money, we have already ramped up a huge deficit in the 2021 budget. That itself is having a telling effect on government resource allocation, because practically, if you look at 2021, we are just living from hand to mouth. We just generate enough to cater for wages and salaries, compensation, gratuities, and then interest payment. There's nothing practically left for anything else. That itself is crowding our priority spending. So you want to be very careful. And
so the finance didn't have a choice?
No, they didn't have a choice.
Okay, stay with me. I'll come to
But somebody will say the only choice they will have will be, well, open the cap, go borrow a little bit more, and live with the consequences.
Yeah, we'll come to borrowing too, because that's who is has consequences you mentioned.
Yeah.
Stay with me. I'll come to that. Let me go to Priscilla. Priscilla, what's your position on that? Did that surprise you? And by the way, the next question then becomes: is that realistic to expect that between now and December we won't spend beyond what we approved in the 2021 budget?
Thank you very much. Good morning, Evans, and good morning to the cherished listeners. To some extent, yes, based on what we are used to, we know that most of the times budget reviews are accompanied by supplementary budgets. But indeed, this is an indication, from my perspective, that, for example, either we are getting better at planning and forecasting. Because indeed, if you are using accurate models to generate your revenue and expenditure handles within the economy, barring any significant negative impact in the economy in the form of significant drop in inflows that will affect your revenue handle, a pandemic or other unanticipated effects, you don't expect that your numbers will change. So the whole idea of we being in a pattern of always raising supplementary budgets within the mid-year review was something that we needed to have a look at. And indeed, in the 2021 budget, as we discussed earlier, the minister was quite clear, laid out all the what they needed to do in raising taxes and all that. So I believe that from where they sit, and within the whole framework of tight fiscal framework and ballooning debt to GDP ratio, I mean, they are being quite cautious and it's in the right direction.
Okay, Dr. Theo Champon, so quite cautious, the right direction, but was it the realistic option? Was the finance minister simply being populist on the day? Because as the minority has suggested, we can bet, as they say, that end of year, he will spend far more than we approved in the 2021 budget. Was this a realistic option?
I think it was a realistic option. I mean, what is without doubt is that the 2022 budget, the numbers will go up and there'll be more spending. But we need to put things in the context, as my other two panelists have said, that the you've got a big deficit situation where you're spending almost 15%, a debt to 15% of your GDP as a deficit, and you've got almost 80%, public debt to address. So in that case, it was always going to be difficult to actually come back and ask, for more financing. But I think to the credit of the government, when you also look into the numbers, there's an interesting story there that what they had projected to spend on the revenue side and what they spend also on to collect on revenue and spend on expenditure, you see a compensatory effect, right? So for example, for the first 6 months of the year, they had programmed to spend 32 billion. They ended up spending 28 billion provisionally on the revenues to collect on the revenue side. And then when you look at the expenditure side of the equation again, they are projected to spend 55 billion. They spent a little under 51 billion. So you begin to see that even in terms of balancing the books, when the revenues underperform, there has been some compensatory effect on the expenditure side of the equation. And that tells me that the policy actions that were taken, at least at this stage, were right. But what, in my view, is clearly without that is that in the 2022 budget, the numbers will go up.
So, final question on this, and then we'll go to some of the key issues. How confident are you that between now and December, we'll actually stay within the 2021 approved spending budget?
The biggest headwind or challenge we got now is if we have another pandemic hitting us, so there's talk of a third wave, and we've seen signs of that in Ghana. But if we have that increasing across the board without the vaccinations, etc., going, and that has a big impact on economic activity, then for sure, most of these numbers would pretty much be out of the blue, because government then will need to borrow more to sustain the economy going forward. So I think that's the really biggest hurdle that we've got to address between now and November or December of this year.
Confident or skeptical that we'll stay within our means?
I think between now and December we will stay.
Okay.
But the caveat is if you have a major third wave in the country, then we'll definitely have to spend more money.
Priscilla, confident or skeptical that we'll stay within our means as the Finance Minister has promised on Thursday?
Definitely. I think Theo has outlined it. If we have a third wave, we cannot afford, we have to save lives. So it means that the budget will be thrown and put aside and then attend to the immediate issues, which will be trying to contain the virus and all that, which all the mitigating measures have negative important effects on the economy. So really at this point, what we would have to do is to keep to the protocols and hope that we don't go through any strong third wave as is happening elsewhere.
Prof, you agree that the two colleagues say the only factor that may shift us beyond the promise of staying within our means will be a third wave. I mean, we know there's a third wave now, right?
Because we are still in the pandemic.
We are still there. I mean,
but beyond that, if there are internal pressures in terms of unsatisfactory performance, in terms of how the citizens view the government, like fix the country and the pressures and all of that, we're also talking about security concerns with our neighbors and all of that. This could also trigger government to respond to those expectations. But you see, government is containing expenditure largely in order to balance. So what we are doing now is balancing the books, basic accounting, balancing the books. Okay, so we don't want to hurt anybody. But does government have enough room to introduce additional taxes in addition to what we're containing?
Clearly no.
The answer is no.
Yeah.
The answer is no. So, and the point is that once the government is also not spending to stimulate growth, that is also going to have implications. Because the issue is that we've seen some recovery. But how job-rich is that recovery? How does that recovery meet the expectations and undo the negative effect of the pandemic?
I mean, the Deputy Finance Minister is on, joins us, Dr. John Kumar. So, Mr. Kumar, so tell me, this announcement that you're not going to ask for more money, was it imposed on you by reality? Or, you simply decided that is a prudent thing to do, although we could have actually gone for more?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh goodness. We have a challenge with your line. Let's hope that we could get a stable
morning to your listeners.
Great. Okay, sorry, we have a challenge with your connection. We will try and fix that. Okay, so let's go to some of the specifics. What was the biggest takeaway for you from the media budget review, Prof?
Well, really, government kept to its budget in 2021, so there's no takeaway from the media review.
Okay, so
whatever we needed to know were contained in the 2021 budget.
So there was no surprises. There was nothing.
The government is keeping to its targets and all of that. We know that we need to do some fiscal consolidation. We need to contain our debt build up and all of that. Okay, so if you look at a lot of the things, they are, should I say, good intentions, but we don't have the fiscal space to be able to translate those good intentions into actual. And it's down to money. So once government revenue remains dwarfed, it's going to affect government's ability to spend probably in the area of health the way it should, in the area of education the way it should, and maybe social protection the way it should. Because it's down to just that. We don't have money. So we don't have money to do any kind of stimulus. We don't have money in terms of to implement specific policies that would engineer job-rich recovery. We don't have that. And we are also concerned at the macro level about containing our debt. The discussion all over is about our debt. It may not be so much in terms of the debt to GDP ratio, even if it's 80%, because baseline, it tells you how hard would it be to pay off all of our debt with 1 year's output. But there's no requirement in our law that we should pay off all our debt with 1 year's output, because we borrow against future cash flow. But you want to go beyond the debt to GDP ratio and look at the other effect of the debt buildup. And the other effect, you look at your interest to revenue ratio, and you realize that the huge interest payment on the debt is crowding out priority spending. Okay, so until you are able to increase your revenue envelope, contain your debt, you won't have enough fiscal space to be able to do interventions and implement them the way you want to do. Because if you look at the numbers that we have, anything major government would want to do today, then it means that the government has to go and borrow. It's as simple as that.
Interesting. So John Kuma is back on. John, I lost you briefly, but you attempted to answer the question whether your decision not to ask for more money, whether that was imposed on you by reality.
Yes, we needed to send is the objective of government to state it clearly that we wanted to stay within the fiscal discipline or the fiscal consolidation agenda of government. If you have noticed, the Fiscal Responsibility Act has been suspended, and the idea is to be able to come to the threshold of 5% by 2024. So not asking for supplementary budget is one of the strongest indications that government is prepared to stay to fiscal discipline. So that's one. Two is to also not try to burden the already difficult COVID-induced environment with any new measures in the form of taxes or any kind of measures that could bring extra hardship to the people, because COVID has already imported certain level of hardship, like now the cost of freight has gone up and several other things. That makes it difficult for government to be able to introduce any new measures in this difficult time. So we didn't want to, government wanted to show empathy and understanding to the people. Thirdly was to be firm on the problem of the youth unemployment and create hope on job creation. And so government has set a target to create about 1 million jobs in the next medium term, starting from now. And when we say we are creating jobs, we are talking about both the public sector and the private sector. So now government has already started giving out financial clearance in various institutions to start recruitment. And the priority of choice is also on the NAPCO personnel to be able to make them permanent in various institutions. And whilst we do that, we also want to create more enabling environment for entrepreneurs and young people who are starting business to be able to secure sustainable funding arrangements and all that. So these were the three strong objectives that we wanted to send out with the mid-year budget statement.
Let's stay with the last point you made, and I think that's a big line item for a lot of people who listen to the budget. Was it jobs?
Okay.
Was it jobs? Was it jobs? So the biggest line in there for many people, because the biggest problem we have in the youth. Let's stay with that. How do you, coming back from the conversation we've just had about you not asking for more money, Prof in the studio had said the fiscal space is too tight. You don't have options. If you want to do anything, you have to borrow. And we know that there too, you have a problem with your debt ratios being unsustainable. So explain to the masses that you claim you want to create the jobs for, how you plan to create all these jobs in the midst of all the difficulties that you yourself have articulated right now in terms of funding.
The question of choice, let's understand that governments always have choices. As to whether it will be a good choice or a better choice, it's only a question of judgment. But I can tell you the objective of government is what I've put out, to stay disciplined within the fiscal framework. And the idea of financing the job creation agenda that we have put out. You remember in the 2021 budget, we spoke about the Obatampa Cares program, which is the revitalization agenda of government to restore the economy to productive ways. So it's a 100 billion facility project where government is raising 70 billion cedis from the private sector and 30 billion cedis through government arrangement. And the job creation basically is anchored on the Obatampa Cares. So government is talking about a program like UBank, which is just a new product being introduced within the commercial banks. So you are creating a new banking arrangement where young people with business ideas could go to any bank in Ghana across the country, where they are treated on different terms, not on commercial terms, so they can borrow without collateral, and the interest rate could be lowered for them in terms of payment, also made more flexible. So that is one, and also we are seeking to sign a compact, youth compact. Under the Obatampa Cares, beyond the budgetary allocation for certain ministries, we have selected 8 extra ministries to receive extra funding. So we've signed a compact with Ministry of Agriculture, we've signed a compact with the Ministry of Tourism, Trade and Industry, and several others. So we are now going to sign a youth compact with a focus on job creation. And that is the extra funding we are going to receive to support the 1 million jobs we want to create. At the moment, we are seeking to have an interministerial committee with focus on youth agenda. So the Ministry of Youth and Sports, Ministry of Labor and Employment, and then the Minister for Lands and Industry has also designed a project called the Alternative Livelihood Support Program for Galamseyers. That is targeting about 500,000 youth. We are using the NEIP program to focus on startups, especially graduates and those in our universities who want to start their own businesses. We are looking at the NBSSI, which is now the Ghana Enterprises Agency, to also reach out to women and SMEs. So all these interventions, by the time you put them together in the next 3 years, and remember the 1 million is for 3 years, so the component that is for the rest of the 6 months left for this year is already budgeted for in the 2021 budget. And so in 2022, we'll be able to find another allocation for the program, and then we'll be able to get there.
Let me get my panelists to assess the details you've just given us on how you're creating the job. Dr. Tuya Champo, let me start with you. Give me an assessment of what the details we just had there and how government intends to create the 1 million jobs within the current tight fiscal space they have.
Space. If you look at most of the numbers and the projections, there's no way they would be able to do this without adding on to the debt. So if you look at the latest IMF Article 4 release that came out on the 20th of June, there's a table in there that has some financial indicators with projections, but they're actually projecting that by 2022, the public debt would have gone up to about 84.9%. So, I mean, what this tells me, and like Prof said, it's not so much a question of the debt per se, but we have to then link it to the efficiency of spending, which is where a lot of us have had some issues and concerns, in the past. So most times governments come out with a lot of these nice programs and nice interventions, but the clarity that you need in terms of how they're actually going to implement this, that's one. But number two, how you measure and track benchmarks or progress across time, often that seems to be the missing link. And then third point for me is the connection in terms of all these interventions to, for example, our wider industrial policy and strategy vis-a-vis things like the Continental Free Trade Area. These things require some higher level policy coordination. I'm happy he talks about this interministerial committee, etc. But it comes back for me to really the most important point not being money per se, because you can still go and borrow to finance those development outcomes. And Batampa, they talk about 30-70, so 70% of the financing coming from the private sector and 30% coming from the public. But I think the really important conversation in all of this is, getting into the nitty-gritty details around efficiency of spending and connecting these to the wider developmental outcome. Because even, the issue of the youth unemployment that we've got in the country, when you look at the data over the last 5 or so years, there is deepening inequality. And the IMF even, again, makes reference to this in their the statement that they issued a couple of days ago, that whereas growth in Ghana slowed in 2020 to 0.4% from 6.5% in 2019, food prices spiked, and this is the point I want to highlight, and poverty increased. So this is where I think most of the interventions that government is making, although they are good on paper, we need to really get down into the nitty-gritties in terms of connecting these to wider outcomes and then how you track that over time.
Dr. Chumesi Barford, where do you stand on this?
Great. I think job creation is critical because it is through employment that people's livelihoods are improved. So indeed, when you look at the numbers in there, I see that government is trying to, in this scenario, trying to look at entrepreneurship, promote entrepreneurship activity across board so that employment will be generated. But when you look at the data, and one thing I need to point out is that any employment strategy in the country that is, quote unquote, trying to solve unemployment problem, that comes directly by absorbing the unemployed into the public sector in one way or the other, means that you are solving one problem, but you create another, because we know that based on domestic revenue, our domestic revenue is basically used to pay wages and salaries, statutory payments, and interest payments. The rest, in terms of capital expenditure and all that, will depend on grants and borrowing to do that. So for me, any attempt at job creation that is coming by tapping into the resource in the private sector, is critical. Because when you look at the data, for example, in terms of population, employment to population ratio, we find that in the country still, employment is not changing. The structure of the economy really is not changing. And that is why revenue mobilization is still a major challenge at this point. Why is that? Because when you look at it, the public sector is employing about 7%. The private sector, which is supposed to be the engine of growth, is also employing about 8 to 9%. The rest of the people are in the informal sector, and we know that the majority of the people in the informal sector do not pay direct taxes, income taxes. And we need the revenue to be able to develop. So that is why consistently we find that we have a challenge with our budgets. And until a conscious effort is made to generate decent employment where people are able to make contributions towards the national cake in the form of payment of taxes through, for example, formalization of the economy and creating decent jobs, we will always be going around in circles.
I mean, Prof, So we got these details a short while ago. I mean, do you agree with Tio Champa when he says there's no way they can do this without adding on to the debt?
You know what? Government is right, and that is good intention. Who create jobs? 1 million jobs in the next 3 years. Look, we have been hearing that for a long time now. Check 2014 budget. Check 2015 budget, 2016 budget, 2017, 2018. You will see who is tracking those numbers. If we were able to translate those, because all the things captured in the budget, baseline, they are good intentions. They are not accomplishment. And we cannot substitute good intentions for accomplishment.
It's a very important point that if all the job promises in the last decade
they would have been
achieved, we won't have any unemployment in Ghana.
And the reason is that, not that I'm blaming government, the reality in terms of the constraint, the budget rigidity, makes it practically impossible to translate that good intention into actual in a more sustainable, measurable, that you can even see. That's the issue. So the question is, you want to create 1 million jobs. What are the channels of transmission? How do we measure it? Because you must direct spending in those critical subsectors of the economy that would inure to job-rich economic recovery. And in fact, you mentioned something. When you understand the effect of the pandemic, it's a pandemic of inequality. It magnifies the existing vulnerabilities in our society, particularly inequality. The haves and the have-not. So if you look at the data from Ghana Statistical Service in terms of job losses, okay, reduced wage hours and all of that, that tells you, it typifies inequality. So any recovery we are looking at today must be a recovery that seeks to undo that effect and create a just society. You saw what happened in South Africa, right? Okay, to a large extent, that is the effect of inequality. Okay, we are talking about a country where out of 10 graduates, it's only 3 that are likely to get a job. Okay, and if you look at the data in Ghana, the reason we are all passionate about job creation, because we are sitting on a time bomb. Unemployment is high among university graduates between 22 and 29. In other words, we are using the productive aspect of our life, the youth, to look for jobs that do not exist. Okay, so if we talk about all these things and we don't back it with concrete strategy, with the necessary financial resources, people will still finish their universities and still go out there and will be unemployed, regardless of whether they study job creation in the university or employment.
He gave us some specifics on the question you asked about what are the vehicles you're using to deliver. He said something that struck me. They're setting up a youth bank, and he broke that down. He says they're having a relationship with banks, all banks, where once this is implemented, a young man can approach a bank and he or she can borrow without collateral and at low interest rates. And then there's a public sector angle where agric, lands and natural resources are all being taxed to develop youth-specific projects with incentives for them. But let's start with the first bit, the first line of the private sector bank's intervention. Borrowing without collateral. That will definitely create a lot of jobs for young people.
Hold on. Look, we have heard these things. It's good. Government will have to work hard and try to borrow below the interest rate. What will be that interest rate? Which are these NGOs? Banks that thrives on grace and will lend with no collateral below the market interest rate. Beyond that, remember, interest rate is not the only factor in the production mix to create jobs. We are talking about a certain enabling environment cutting across policy, regulation, and markets and all of that. Okay, so it's good that we are talking about these interventions. But look at the credit situation in Ghana and look at where credit is going right now, because banks are rational economic agents, baseline, and all of that. So certainly government will have to come in. If we are not careful, we do some of these things, then it ends up with some kind of default, it ends up with certain kind of debt that ultimately the state will have to absorb. So if you look, and that is why I think on one breath, maybe it was a good signal that the government says that they are not going to, they are not coming out of with a supplementary budget that will require borrowing, because that will mean that they are going to compete with the private sector for the limited credit in there. But if you look at the credit dynamics right now, banks are comfortable making investment in government bills. They have become more risk averse, okay, because of the COVID. Okay, so they will do their analysis and look at where credit should go to and where there's greater protection from perceived defaults. They will do all of that. But we are talking about the linkages, and I think Theo talked about that, beyond a certain framework that says that this fits into this fits into this, this fits into this. And then we talk about the job creation. Beyond that, you know, no country has ever developed solely on the strength of SMEs, baseline entrepreneurs. We must be intentional about supporting domestic private sector, regardless of their political affiliations. We have to, as a country. And we have to do all of this, and I'm sure government is aware, and government is doing that. We have to do this within a certain context now of AFCFTA. So we are talking about one big market. That's huge opportunity. 1.3 billion people, over $3 trillion in terms of GDP. That's huge. Then it means that we have to be able to create the necessary framework, condition framework that enables the Ghanaian private sector to be that competitive, to take advantage of that. But I don't think we are there now. And if we talk about enabling environment, in our mind, what is it that constitutes enabling environment? At what rate should that youth entrepreneur borrow to make him competitive, to undo the other challenges in the economy?
Let me bring back John Kumar. John, I want to return to the specific about the initiatives that will deliver the jobs, and to the point about the banks lending to young people without collateral and low interest rate. What incentive will a private bank have in a country like Ghana to lend to a young man without collateral and at, you know, low interest rates?
Yeah, thank you. And you know, government has already an existing model under the One District, One Factory, where the government is able to have an arrangement with the banks to absorb a percentage of the interest rate. And that serves as a motivation for banks to give out loans to existing entrepreneurs who want to take advantage of government policy of One District, One Factory. So in a similar vein, first of all, the banks stand to gain from, you know, getting new crop of customers who are young people, who are ambitious and have the vision and determination to grow their businesses. And, you know, government is taking part of the risk in terms of guaranteeing or assuring the banks that the government is prepared. Please, can you hear me?
Sorry, I can hear you loud and clear, yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. So government, the presence of government as a backup for these interventions gives a lot of assurance to the bank. And the other incentive is that these numbers that we are trying to prepare to enter into the entrepreneurship space and create economic opportunities and jobs for the youth, it's a potential future customers for these banks. So I strongly believe that even as part of their corporate social responsibility, some of the banks will even be willing to support government in achieving this laudable objective.
Dr. Theo Champon, are you as optimistic as the Deputy Finance Minister on this subject of the private banks? Remember, the Obatampa 100 billion, 70 billion of that is private sector. So I'm assuming that if you want to quantify, this part of it will be part of the 70 billion. So in that, back to the question, are you as optimistic as the Deputy Finance Minister that the banks, one, through corporate social responsibility and through incentives that government will give, are willing to make all these adjustments to create these jobs for the young people?
On incentives, yes. On CSR, I don't think so, because the banks, as Prof said, they are rational economic agents. But I think the other thing that maybe is a positive here in all of this is also, the Development Bank Ghana concept or model that is also being touted in the budget statement. And then there's also two other things that they talk about. They talk about venture capital financing for SMEs under the Ghana Cares program. And then there's the Ghana Enterprises Agency, which is meant to promote the development of Ghanaian MSMEs. So they're all well and good. Of course, there's some details that some of us would expect, but to be fair to government, as Prof said, the intentions are well and good. Also, we need to recognize that often there's a lag between when you introduce these interventions and when you begin to see the effect of that at the kind of wider macro level, including even things like the domestic revenue mobilization with the whole digitalization agenda. So coming back to your question, I think, we are yet to see how this would look like or how this would translate into outcomes 3 years down the line and whether or not those 1 million jobs would have been created. But certainly the vehicles to do that, some of them are there. Others, in my view, could be strengthened. And it goes back to some of the points, that some of us have been making around creating linkages and finding those productive sectors in the economy that we have some advantage that we can actually champion and support. So here I'm talking, for example, within the ICT space, within the tourism space, within the horticultural space. And these are places or environments where you can have the potential for high productivity, for agglomeration, and potentially you can have that catalytic impact on creating jobs as well. So I have a mixed view on that, but I think we just have to give a bit of credit to the government in terms of the interventions and intention behind it, but they need to be coordinated, because if you look at our economic history, most of the time we've had certain interventions like this being introduced. You can go back to budgets in the 70s and 80s and you see something similar being attempted to introduce, but it comes to the policy mistakes and the missteps that have been made, and that joined up, thinking in terms of connecting these to wider developmental outcomes.
I mean, John Kuma also addressed this point for me. Dr. Tue Champon had earlier said that there's no way you can do what you're proposing to do in creating other jobs without adding on to the debt stock. Do you agree?
Like I have already told you, these projections have been made within the fiscal framework that is already projected for 2021. And like I told you, don't confuse the figures of the IMF with the central reporting of our deficit by the central government. They are using general government reporting, so their figures tend to be high. They add contingent liabilities and other costs that tend to increase those things. So, but if you stick to government deficit reporting of 13.9% in 2020, we are saying that in 2021, we are going to maintain a deficit of 9.5% of our GDP. Then we expect to go down further in 2022 to maybe 7% or below. And then by 2023, 2024, we should hit the fiscal responsibility threshold of 5%. So we are mindful of these fiscal targets, and we are not going to add on unless it fits within the framework. So, and also, don't forget, to be able to achieve that, we need to increase our revenues. And because that is so key and central to your debt filing in terms of, so when you said the primary balance is the net accumulation of your debt, one of the effective ways to be able to overcome your debt levels is to increase your revenue. The government is also introducing a number of interventions. Apart from the digitalization agenda, we have just introduced the Ghana.gov, and if we are seeking to also align the Ghana card to all the TIN numbers of our country, which will automatically shoot the taxpayers level from 3 million, those captured from 3 million to about 17 million population immediately. And then also the digitalization has helped us to identify about 60,000 professionals in Ghana who do not pay tax. So we are introducing the Revenue Assurance, Compliance and Enforcement, called the RACE program, which will now help government through the digitalization effort to identify every Ghanaian and how your expenditures and incomes are made and what revenue you pay to government. So the lawyers and engineers and doctors and all the professionals who earn a living, but because it's voluntary, they don't pay, we will now be more proactive in reaching out to this category of people. In essence, we are trying to say that we are working hard to improve on revenues. And when we are able to achieve a higher revenue target, then you don't need to be worried so much about your debt levels, because you see, even though the IMF commented that Ghana is financially distressed, they added that the capacity of Ghana to repay its debt is adequate. It means that we have the capacity. We just have to ensure that the financial framework that we have, we are able to stick to it, and then we will be able to achieve good results.
Okay, just for clarity, before I bring in Professor Bokwing and then I hear from Dr. Chumesia, are you clarifying that as far as government is concerned, the target is to realize these 1 million jobs in the next 3 years without adding on to our debt stock?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
That's the clarity. Yes.
Well, that's going to be very difficult. And I'm sure it's going to get a year down the line. It's going to be like multiple choice. Government will say, yeah, we created 1 million jobs. And where is it? And another entity or minority will say, no, it's not like that. Okay, so I think we cannot run away from the reality. And I think there's no point denying it also that we are in a fix also because of COVID, and also because of how we walked into COVID because of the energy sector crisis and the explicit debt formation from there, and then the financial sector. I believe that any government would want to fix our roads, build hospitals, schools, furnish it if they had money. Okay, if they had money. If the president had money, they would do all that we are asking for. The reason they are unable to translate this into ATWA year in, year out, you see it across all the budgets, is down to one thing: there's no money. And in our attempt to go beyond our means will result in debt formation. And that is what I believe that the media review tries to do, or to avoid that. You know what, let's stay within the budget. So if you say that now you want to create 1 million jobs, and maybe you are announcing this in the media review, but it's not coming with any additional money and all of that. If you look at Obatampa, how much will be mobilized from private sector? Is it coming? How much is supposed to come from government? Is it coming the way it should? And all of that. We are not there yet. Okay, and if you look at the recovery, we still have to be a bit conscious, because if you look at the IMF economic outlook, the recovery is predicated on the assumption of greater vaccination. In the advanced country, they are doing well. So far, they have achieved 40% in terms of vaccination. The emerging market have achieved 11%. Low-income developing countries are doing 1% or less. So that has implication for recovery. Okay, in the second half. Thankfully, if you look at Ghana, I must also admit that if you look at the approach with which government adopted in responding to COVID-19, I think it's been very good. And we can't take that away from them. If you look at the system they have put in place that made us attractive to getting the vaccines, the first batch, and the fact that we are being told by the end of the year we'll get this and all of that, that is quite good. Okay, so it's going to take a while. So I think my message will be that we need to be very conscious. We need to be moderate. And our greatest hope in doing all that government has talked about actually does not lie with extra borrowing much, but it lies more in terms of our ability to increase our domestic revenue mobilization. We need to do that. And when we say we need to do that, we are not overstretching the point. Because if you look at Ghana, even with the level of informality, compared to our peers with similar challenges, they are doing far better than Ghana is doing in terms of our tax effort. In other words, our tax scaled by our GDP, we are doing less than 13%. Our peers are doing between 18 and 20%. So that gap alone could be closed to our advantage without burdening the faithful few. So there's room. And here it's not more of the policy level, it's more of the compliance and administrative level. So which means that we need to enhance greater compliance. And I'm happy government is talking about digitization and all of that. Okay, so the theoretical benefit of all of that have been talked about. Now we need to get to work and do it this way. And once government is going after every cedi that the state thinks that is in your pocket, that same state must be efficient with how it utilizes the resources. Other than that, the citizen will come at them.
I mean, Dr. Chimesi, now we've had clarity from the Deputy Finance Minister that they intend to create all these jobs without adding to the debt stock. I mean, give me your quick reaction to that.
Like I indicated, this basically was a review of our performance so far based on the 2021 budget that was read in March. So I'm not surprised that that is their anticipation. And indeed, when you look at it, it appears that at this point, the employment generation is going to go through the Ghana Cares of Atampa program, which is seeking to raise significant revenue from the private sector in the form of domestic and foreign direct investment. So indeed, when you look at this, I think that in the employment generation area, one thing that is lacking is for us to harmonize all the activities that are going on in there. Because you tend to find that a lot of agencies are doing a number of things. So, for example, you have the Youth Employment Agency, you have the Ghana Enterprise Agency that is lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises. You have MASLOC, and now there is another that is coming on board. We need to have a harmonious program that is looking at youth employment. And for every activity that government is engaging, I think that we should be intentional about the number of jobs that are created within that activity. So when you look at it, it's focusing on light manufacturing, for example, agro-processing and pharmaceuticals, among others. I mean, the opportunity exists within these areas for significant job creation. And when you look at, for example, agro-processing and light manufacturing, the kinds of jobs that are created, you are not looking at sophisticated skills. You are looking at people with medium to low skills who can gain gainful employment within these areas. So I think that that is one thing we need to look at. And on the revenue generation aspect, in terms of how do we mobilize enough revenue, indeed, like the other panelists have indicated, we are still underperforming in terms of our tax to GDP ratio. Other economies are doing better. The evidence points to the fact that, for instance, digitization and mechanization are key indicators that will significantly reduce the leakages that are in the system. I know of a study that has looked at the impact of, for example, giving simple tablets to tax collection agents in the area of property taxes. And that has led to significant improvements in the revenues that are generated. I think it increased by about 70%. So there is a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of the revenue that we are generating domestically in the area of tax revenue. And then at this point, I also think that we need to also take a second look about our non-tax revenue. What is happening in terms of the proceeds that we're getting from our natural resources? Because Ghana is a natural resource-rich nation. And so at the end, when our resources are exploited, how much goes to us as a country? When you look at the data, for example, we see that Ghana currently does about 4% of GDP in terms of the revenue that comes from natural resources. Botswana, for example, is doing about 18% of its GDP from the exploitation of diamonds. So I think that we need to have a second look, because in the area of tax revenue mobilization through taxes. It is taking time. And indeed, in terms of formalization of the informal sector and all these initiatives, they are medium to long-term impacts that we anticipate. But in the meantime, what are we doing really? And these are some of the discussions that we need to have to get good value for money, because our environment, for example, are depleted because of exploitation. What comes to us as a country? And these are options. And we know that countries have developed by the exploitation of natural resources through diligent contract and others that make them get enough revenue from their resources.
I want to take a quick break on this. When we return, we will wrap up on the budget, and of course on Newsfile for today. And I'll pick quick comment. There are two quick things in the media budget review that also came up from many people's commentary. The question about wages was a key thing for people. We now have aggrieved public sector workers saying, listen, I think they said 4%. It's too small. But in the budget, but the finance minister was clear that, listen, we did agree on the new minimum wage with Labour, the tripartite committee, and it was based on a general consensus that government cannot pay what we do not have. And some of the workers have taken offense to that and said the 4% is too small, and there's some agitation. We'll get comments on that, because government will still have to bear a huge part of the burden. It's what they pay for wages and salaries. And I will end by a brief comment on the finance minister also chose to include in the budget a comment on the National Cathedral and asked that you contribute 100 cedis to it. I'll ask the quick thoughts of my panelists on that as we wrap up, just on the small matter of the National Cathedral that was in the budget. Remember that Newsfile is always brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group, as close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go. Ashasa University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert and Sons, seeing is believing. We lead, home is where one starts from. Star Assurance, your solid partner. Duraplus, where Duraplus goes, water flows. DBS Industries, CIMA, helping people and businesses to succeed. We'll be right back.
Repeat, I'm not here today to ask for more money. I have not come. Mr. Speaker, I'm not here today to ask for more money. I have not come to ask for more taxes. I have come to update the House on the performance of the economy for the first half year of 2021 and our plans for the unexpired term of the year, consistent with Section 28 of the PFM Act.
So that is the finance minister there on the floor of Parliament on Thursday. Let's wrap up now in the next 10 minutes. And I want to quickly give a quick line to Dr. Kuma, who is, of course, the Deputy Finance Minister, on this big question about wages. So the Finance Minister, when he spoke, reserved a bit of the first part to address Labour. And he was clear that the new minimum wage that had been agreed at the tripartite committee level was one that was agreed because there was an understanding that government cannot pay what he has, what it doesn't have, and that productivity is important. Some workers have taken offense at that, and they believe you gave them 4% increase, and yet you gave yourself far more than that, and yet you make the point about you don't have money. How do you address that? Because you need these workers in this course of the next few months for the big question of productivity, right? And so address the concerns that we've had the workers express about the comments of the finance minister in the media budget review that you cannot share what you don't have.
Yes. So let me put this in perspective. You remember we were coming from 2020 COVID, where many workers were home, but yet government had to pay their wages throughout the whole year. And I think that the leadership of the labor unions reciprocated that good gesture in this negotiation in terms of accepting to take what was agreed upon. But most importantly, the finance minister's comment comes in the area of the what the Ghana situation is. At the moment, 56% of our domestic revenue goes into wages and salaries of 740,000 workers on the payroll. So if you look at it, we are spending 56%, but our regional average is about 38% within the ECOWAS sub-rate. And in Ghana, we are spending as much as 56% of our domestic revenues to be able to take care of 740,000 on the wage bill. So this is what the finance minister is speaking in terms of productivity. We will be able to do more. If we are able to do more, we can give more to workers. Even if it's 50% and productivity is high, we'll be able to give more to workers. But if you have less productivity, you can even give 60-70% of all that you have, and it will still not be satisfactory to the workers. So it was not to spite them, but to explain the situation to them that we all have to increase our productivity and efficiency so that we can give more to workers in Ghana. This is what he meant.
Dr. Priscilla Chumesi Bafo, when the finance minister made that comment that we cannot share what we do not have, and that what we've agreed for wages for workers is all you're getting, he was simply stating facts. I mean, he was being factual, was he not?
Indeed, you cannot share what you don't have. But I believe that sometimes in issues like this, a lot of emotion come to play. So, but the reality of the matter is that when we talk about remuneration or reward for labor, productivity is critical. And it to a large extent also influences the competitiveness of the nation. Are firms able to produce and sell at market rates in other countries, or is it that our cost of production is too high? So when you talk about public sector wage, so just like the Deputy Minister indicated, a lot of our domestic resources are going into the payment of salaries and wages of public sector workers. And that is why, for me, any attempts at solving unemployment challenges in the country by loading on more people onto the public sector wage bill is really not a sustainable way of trying to solve the challenges that we have. But that said, we also know that indeed workers are concerned about the nominal wage, but the real value of the wage they take home is also critical in terms of how much you are able to afford. And when you look at the inflation rates, in recent times we haven't done badly. And the expectation is that given that we have been in a pandemic, which has significantly affected production in the country, this is probably the time that we should all tighten our belt and contribute to lift ourselves out. But that said, when we see people in authority being ostentatious, people in authority not living by the examples that they are supposed to, then indeed workers will be up in arms and demand what is due them. So it's more like a chicken and egg situation here. But for competitiveness of the country, particularly for the private sector, in order not to unduly burden the whole idea of paying higher wages, because it serves as a signal, particularly with the minimum wage for those in the formal sector. So any significant increase also has an impact on the cost of production, and that also has an impact on prices. So if you are not careful and wages are not matched by productivity increases, it could only be inflationary, and at the end of the day you find that workers will be worse off than it is. But I mean, what is due everybody ought to go to them And in that case, particularly with the public sector, how do we even measure that productivity? That is also a question, because you cannot just throw it up in the air like that and say that, yes, maybe people are not being productive. Are there supervision that is taking place? Are there expected outputs that are targets that are given to people to satisfy at certain specific time? If not, really, it is said that people do not do things that you do not supervise, really. So that would be my take on that.
I mean, Dr. Theo Champon, 56%, I had the Deputy Finance Minister say, of the revenue that we make as a country go to pay wages and salaries. And so, and that is clearly unsustainable, but it's been like that for so long. It's grown and grown and grown. I mean, government is doing enough, right, for workers?
It's interesting. See, if you go back to look at a number of the structural adjustment programs from the 80s, you see the same narrative or story, which is that we want to reform the public service, money goes in, but the outcome is that productivity of labor, particularly the public sector in Ghana, and this is a fact, you can see it in a number of studies, one is very low, but at the same time, we keep, increasing the numbers in terms of people that we're employing. And I get that as where, the public service is coming from. Because the other side to the equation is that they also see the political class as, to borrow Dr. Chumesi's word, living ostentatiously, things like MPs loans, V8, etc. So there's a bit of a narrative, a perception issue there, that in one breath you say we should tighten our belt, but in another one to, here you are spending money that is not due you. But the fact of the situation is that we're spending, in my view, far too much in terms of compensating labor without an adequate response in terms of, the productivity gap. And then on the revenue things, two quick things that I think can be done. We need to quickly pass the tax exemptions bill. It's still been sitting in before the House. We need to address the issues of transfer pricing in the extractive space. And on digitalization, we've done some work, and there's almost an 8% of GDP opportunity. If you translate that into quantum terms, we can actually generate as much of 25 billion or 5 billion extra USD of revenues every year in this country without having to go and borrow unnecessarily, which adds to the public debt stock.
Prof, your quick comment on this wages matter.
Well, certainly Labour would want more in the presence of all that is going on. But the question is, do we have the space to absorb that? That is the issue. But if you look at the statistics, it's not extraordinary. It's just because we are not generating sufficient tax revenue in relation to the size of our economy that would have made this percentage he quoted look a bit small and created some space for other priority spending or even to scale up in terms of wage payment. But if you talk about productivity and all of that, that is for the employer to solve. Of course.
Which is government.
Which is government, working with labor. Because the reality on the ground, and I do agree with what Dr. Priscilla and Theo said. Look, an inefficient public sector represents cost to the private sector as they interact with the public sector, and they contribute to the high productive cost base of doing business in Ghana. And all of that adds together to make us a bit uncompetitive. And it's going to, if we are not careful, that would affect our ability to maximize the opportunities from the AFCFTA. Because the gains from the AFCFTA relies largely on a competitive private sector. So we need to address that. So I think government needs to look at that, look at productivity. How do we measure it? How do we track it? Do we have job description for every public sector worker? And all of that. We need to do that. We can do that if we want to, because other countries have done that. Until we fix that, it's going to have implications for the private sector and private sector competitiveness. Okay, so we need to look at that. Then also, in fact, somebody told me that, look, the only way to solve this wage problem is to make every public sector worker Article 71 holder. So
that's a good one.
so that tells you that, I mean, in the face of all of these things, I mean, cost of living is rising.
Yeah.
Okay, even though inflation has come down, it's coming down. It doesn't suggest that prices are coming down. Prices are going up at a reduced rate. But of course, the basket doesn't measure everything, and all of that. So I believe that there are real concerns that government will have to sit down with labor, and I think government will just have to be truthful. Sometimes the truth hurts. I believe that the minister put it clearly. That we can't give what we don't have. I mean, it's like you can't save somebody if you you understand. But government must lead by example. If you're asking everybody to tighten their belt and you don't have a belt on at all, then it's going to be very difficult. And all of that. So
listen, I need to wrap up in the next 30 seconds. In the media review, very quick comment. Finance Minister says, let's back the drive to raise funds for the cathedral. Have you contributed 100 cedis?
I just sent 200 Ghana cedis right now.
Oh, goodness me.
And I'm going to continue.
Okay, well, so that's your position on that. And I'm sure the Finance Minister and government will say thank you very much. And the trustees.
I'm looking forward to its completion.
Theo, have you sent your 100 cedis?
He should send pounds.
I'm more than happy to contribute. I think we need to build a built environment and develop our cultural heritage, and I'll be happy to contribute.
Yes, Deputy Minister.
Yes, in fact, it's grateful to those who are contributing. Is the minimum, and trust me, those who are not interested, they shouldn't worry. It's not to every Ghanaian. It's not compulsory. It's voluntary. But we believe that in the end, Ghana stands to gain hugely for this project. Thank you.
Professor Bafo, are you 100 cedis gone yet?
I think it's a personal choice that I would like to keep to myself, but overall, it will add to our infrastructure in the country. So indeed,
okay.
But I haven't, and I'll rather keep it to myself.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Grateful that you joined us. Listen, enjoy the rest of your weekend. If you're traveling, please be safe on the roads. Next week, Samson's going to be back, and I can bet you I'll be watching him from the comfort of my bed. See you.